guest tonight is KrisAnne Hall. She is a constitutional attorney, lecturer, and radio host. She has devoted her life to teaching Americans about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. She's also an author. Her most recent book is Sovereign Duty. Her website is KrisAnneHall.com. So, KrisAnne, how you doing tonight?
I am fantastic.
Thank you for coming on the show. You've done a number of...
My pleasure.
Oh, yeah, you're certainly welcome. Now, you've done a number of lectures. You've written a few books, several books. You've done DVDs about the Constitution and the federal government. Now, we have today a federal government that seems out of control. It respects no limitations on it. It acknowledges no limitations on its own powers. And the Constitution seems to be a mere, darn scrap of paper. How do we get to this point?
Well, Samuel Adams said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved." He said, "But on the contrary, when a people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders." And that's how we've come to this point. We've come to the point where we've become universally ignorant of our Constitution. We've come to the point where we don't understand what it means, where it came from, and we think that it was written by a bunch of guys that are dead now, so it's irrelevant. And it doesn't mean what it's supposed to mean. And our framers warned that to treat our Constitution as a changing, evolving document transforms our written Constitution into an unwritten one of arbitrary meaning. And that's contrary to the entire purpose of a written compact. Our framers were or at least our law, because everybody who lived in the American colonies were British colonists, and so our Constitution is an evolution of British Constitution. And part of their problem was that in order to amend the Constitution, they had to chop off people's heads, and in order to sustain the Constitution, they had to actually control government, because their constitutions were charters of promises from the king. And they didn't have a written constitution in the manner that we think of. Their written constitution was a promise from the king that changed its mind when the king wanted to change its mind. And our framers told us that man only requires to understand his rights to estimate them properly. The ignorance of the people is the footstool of despotism. And so we have decades now, reaching into 100 years or more, of not teaching the Constitution properly. And we have had our liberty used as a footstool for the despotism of our government today.
And you say ignorance. That's because the people have not been instructed or educated on the history and meaning of the Constitution. And I guess the chief blame for that would be the legal profession, the courts.
Oh, well, no, not necessarily. I mean, it works out a little bit here and there. I mean, I would say that our law schools have a lot to bear for the fact that the courts do not follow the Constitution anymore. But our children and adults don't know the Constitution. That's not a lawyer's fault. Mm-hmm. That's the fault of the people. I mean, we at Texas Tech, a group of concerned students on Texas Tech did a man on the street poll and asked people when did we gain our independence and who did we gain it from? And they didn't even know the date. They didn't know who we became independent from. And they were given dates like, 1967, and I'm not quite sure who it was. And that's not, a lot of people say, well, that's our failing school system. But, that's not really the school system either. I mean, that's a reflection of the teachers. That is a reflection of the parents. That's a reflection of our communities, where we have young people who do not know who we gained our independence from and what year that was. I travel around and teach, so I teach about 265 lessons in over 22 states around the country every year. And I teach high school, middle school students, I teach college students, I teach adult groups, I teach state legislators and law enforcement. And when I'm teaching the adults, I love to ask them this question. There are 5 liberties in the First Amendment. Name all 5. And I know that only about 2% on average of the people in my audience will be able to name all 5. How is it that we think that we have rights, and how is it that we think that we can protect our rights if we don't even know what they are? I mean, if you don't know what your rights are, you don't even know if they're gone or not.
Mm-hmm. You have no rights if you don't know if you don't know what they are. That's right.
That's right, because if you don't know what they are, you are not exercising them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not exercising your rights, then they're already gone. I mean, what good is freedom of speech if you never ever say anything controversial? See, the greatest threat to liberty is not just simply a tyrannical government. The greatest threat to liberty is self-censoring. When people will not say things, the whole political correctness thing, when we're afraid to speak because we're afraid of hurting somebody's feelings or offending someone. And now, my goodness, you got to be afraid of what you're going to say because the government might shoot you in the street.
If
you have no freedom if you're going to censor yourself.
And that's the whole. At least one of the main impetuses behind political correctness is controlling the language, the use of the language.
Right, it's making people not speak. So how dare you?
And you can't have.
How dare you speak against the government? You know.
And you can't have anything but small talk, because anything meaningful might offend somebody. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't have a right to not be offended. As a matter of fact, I have a right to offend you. I mean, that's how freedom of speech works. Yeah. But I travel around, I teach the Constitution. That's all I teach. I am not politically motivated or oriented. I teach fact. I teach history. I teach what our framers said. I'm not so much of a teacher as I am a facilitator, and I allow the people who wrote the Constitution and who lived the history of it speak for us. And because I teach that the Constitution created a limited and defined federal government, I was placed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of anti-government extremist groups. I'm a group now, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Anti-government extremist group. How can I be a group? I'm just me. I don't understand that. But I'm anti-government. I'm an anti-government extremist. Think about that now from a logical, critical perspective. I teach the Constitution. It is the Constitution that created government. I am pro-Constitution, therefore I am pro-creation of a limited constitutional republic. And according to those of the Southern Poverty Law Center, according to the people in our government today, I am anti-government.
Mm-hmm.
That's how warped we have become. And ignorance drives that. That's the only thing that drives that is ignorance.
Yeah. And I'm sure your name is on a database at several fusion centers around the country, too.
Oh, sure. Listening to I'm sure they're listening in on us right now. I mean, we're on the internet, so why not?
And I think a few years ago, it was at the Department of Homeland Security, which listed domestic terrorists as people who are unusually well informed on the Constitution.
Well, it was the Department of Homeland Security back when Janet Napolitano was the head of DHS, issued a formal report that said our greatest terrorist threat came from veterans returning from war and from people who were fundamentally speaking out on single issues like abortion. So if you're anti-abortion, then you are a potential domestic terrorist, and you are our greatest threat to America. If you are for legal immigration and not for amnesty, the Department of Homeland Security says you are our greatest potential domestic terrorist. Just recently, the Department of Defense was teaching in an EEOC class that violent extremists, and this is their language, violent extremists are those people who believed, as our framers believed, when they fought for independence from Great Britain. That is a violent extremist ideology.
Well, I guess if you're willing to defend your rights, you're a threat to the system.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And,
But you see, that's the way the system's supposed to be working. They are supposed to fear the people. It's the only thing that keeps the government in check. You had mentioned earlier about the Constitution being a piece of paper. That is all it is. Our framers called the Constitution a parchment barrier because it is just ink with paper with ink on it. The Constitution cannot protect your rights. The Constitution cannot pick up a pen and write your congressman a letter. The Constitution cannot sit in your senator's office and demand compliance. The Constitution can't pick up a sword if becomes necessary. Remember, Jefferson said the tree of liberty must be fertilized by the blood of patriots and tyrants every 20 years. I mean, we haven't repeated that history. But what if we do? The Constitution is not picking up a sword for you. Because the truth of the matter is, that's why they call it a parchment barrier. It's nothing but paper. Mm-hmm. Your rights cannot be protected unless we ourselves protect them. And here's the catch clause. We don't protect our own liberty. Liberty is a gift you pay forward. Mm-hmm. So the liberty that we are squandering today, the servitude that we are accepting for our comfort and our prosperity, is the servitude and slavery that our children will suffer tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. I think it was H.L. Mencken had an interesting quote. What men value in the world is not rights but privileges. And I think that's what you're getting at. There are creature comforts, our subsidies, our favorite programs, and little by little, each one has one man's boondoggle is another man's job program, and that's what's occurred over the several decades as the federal government's expanded. It's created so many special interests and entwined itself into the everyday life of every American.
Absolutely, and every service that they provide drives us greater into servitude until the point where our rights have become privileges. Our right to keep and bear arms has turned into a permission to keep and bear arms. If you have to ask permission from the government to do something, get a permit, then it's no longer a right, it's a permission. Mm-hmm. Our right to liberty has become permissive. Even our right to life these days, according to the HHS and the Affordable Care Act, has become a matter of permission from the government to seek whether you have the ability to live anymore. And so our natural rights have have devolved into matters of permission. And when you have to ask the government for permission to live, then you're dead. You're absolutely dead. Mm-hmm. When you have to ask permission from government to have liberty, then you are in servitude. You are a subject. If you have to ask permission on how to use your property, you're not a freeman. You're an indentured slave. And if you have to ask permission from the government to protect your life, your liberty, or your property, then you are an all-out tributary slave.
And you get an example of the so-called Affordable Care Act, is really Unaffordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, where the government has asserted a compelling interest in controlling health care costs because it assumed the responsibility of paying for health care so many years ago. And now that's a pretext for controlling everyone's lifestyles. And
that's right. And that's a standard that was established by the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. The Supreme Court decided that if the government can show a compelling governmental interest in something, then that trumps your rights. It's how the government can engage in these national security letters, these warrantless searches, how they can listen to your phone conversations, collect your data, watch, they're taking pictures of our license plates and the occupants and drivers of our cars. That's not tinfoil hat. The Wall Street Journal published an article last year about a Freedom of Information request they did of the FBI, in which the FBI admitted that they have been taking pictures of our license plates and taking pictures of the drivers and the occupants of our vehicles, storing them up since 2008. And the reason they can do that without you knowing is because the Supreme Court has declared that if the government can show a compelling governmental interest in something, it trumps your right. So their compelling governmental interest in national security trumps our right to be secure in our persons, houses, papers, and effects from unreasonable searches and seizures. And so what happens now is the Affordable Care Act, which is not about health care, it's about the government subsidizing health care, gives the federal government a compelling governmental interest in the cost of health care. And with a compelling governmental interest in the cost of health care, they now have an automatic compelling governmental interest in anything that impacts the cost of health care, impacts your health, which is everything. They can now tell you what you can eat, what you can grow, where you can live, what cars you can drive, where you can work, and it won't even be done by legislation because that's not how the Affordable Care Act is written. It will be done by regulation, by regulatory agencies that are operated by people that you and I have never elected to office. The very quintessential aspect of legislation without representation.
And you cite compelling interests. If I'm not mistaken, that of course that's a totalitarian claim, Obamacare. It's totalitarian legislation because they claim to legislate everything under the pretext of controlling healthcare costs. But compelling interest, if I'm not mistaken, was that in the Korematsu decision?
Oh, now you're going to ask me and it's going to fly out of my head. I'm not sure. Actually, I can't remember right now.
Well, I thought it had something to do with the internment of Japanese during World War II.
Yeah. Right. Well, no,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's quite possible. I said that's quite possible. I can't remember right now right off the top of my head. But that's something that we have to think about as we give the Supreme Court of the United States its kingdom type rule. We have to remember that this is the Supreme Court that declared that people were property in the Dred Scott case. This is the Supreme Court that said that we could imprison Japanese Americans and Hopi Indians because of our fear, not anything that they've done, without any due process whatsoever, simply because of their birth. These people can go to prison. It is the Supreme Court that said that if a slave escapes from a slave owner and goes into a free state, that the free state must turn that slave over to the slave owner in order to comply with federal law. And so we give way too much credit to the Supreme Court these days, and we give them a power of near kingship, and declare them the ultimate arbiters of the Constitution, and that was something that was never anticipated by our framers. As a matter of fact, spoke often against that mentality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that began with Marshall in Marbury versus Madison, but there was any number of decisions to usurp or claim that power.
Yeah, Marbury versus Madison has become a bootstrapping tool that I don't even think Marshall anticipated. Mm-hmm. I mean, Marshall himself, was about interpreting law, not about interpreting Constitution. And so I think that Marshall, he himself would be spinning in his grave seeing how his words were used today.
And with judicial review, I'm sorry, where my train of thought? I lost my train of thought. I had a question. That's frustrating.
That's okay.
That's right. You made me think when you talk about treating the Supreme Court like a kingship. It reminds me of a conversation I heard one time. The late columnist Joe Sobran was discussing the Supreme Court and constitutional politics with a British subject. And the British subject said that Sobran, he said, well, in our country, we don't have a written constitution. Parliament can just change the Constitution. And his response was, well, in our country, 5 lawyers in D.C. can change the Constitution.
Yeah, well, now 9 judges, 9 kings and queens on the Supreme Court change it all the time.
Yeah.
And that's what's crazy. And the irony is that the British Constitution is not unwritten. Their Constitution was their liberty charters that were written over 700 years. There are 5 written documents. And so just like we run around and claim that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, which means, by definition, that it's not a written document. The people have been taught error in Great Britain about their Constitution as well. It's not a written document. Well, that's very interesting because our framers believed that their Constitution was the culmination of 5 documents. They were the 1100 Charter of Liberties, the Magna Carta, the Petition of Rights, the Grand Remonstrance, and the English Bill of Rights. These 5 documents were the results of revolution in which government was limited in writing and liberty was secured for the people.
And these were concessions won on the battlefield. For the most
right.
part, right?
Well, the first one wasn't. The first one, the 1100 Charter of Liberties, was a promise from Henry I of his own volition. I guess you could say of his own volition. Actually, the real impetus was that he thought they were going to chop off his head, so he sort of preempted revolution and said, "I will give you these, this promise that the government will never be evil and oppressive." But every 4 documents that they came after that were predicated upon revolution and swords to kings' throats.
Now,
one of them actually was against Charles I. They chopped off his head altogether.
Oh, that's right. Then they, of course, I think a decade later, they dug up Cromwell's body and put his head on a pike. But
well, then Cromwell started off okay. The problem is that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and Cromwell fell into that wicked temptation.
The constitutional myths, you touch a lot of that in your talks. One is, well, let's say the Supremacy Clause, the General Welfare, and Commerce Clauses. Want to tackle those for the time we have remaining?
Oh, sure. The Supremacy Clause, that's probably one of my favorites. You hear people say this all the time. And as a matter of fact, if I don't know if it works on the internet, but if you have an iPhone or an Android phone and you Google Supremacy Clause, what you get is an excerpt. They give you those little excerpts. What you get is an excerpt from Cornell University.
I got that tonight, actually.
This is, right. And so what happens is this excerpt from Cornell University perpetuates this lie about the Supremacy Clause. It says Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution is commonly referred to as the Supremacy Clause. It establishes that the federal Constitution and federal laws generally take precedent over state laws and even state constitutions. That is not what the Supremacy Clause says. As a matter of fact, the Supremacy Clause doesn't even say anything close to that. What the Supremacy Clause says is this Constitution, comma, and the laws of the United States made in pursuance thereof, semicolon, are the supreme law of the land. So the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, period. There is nothing above the Constitution. However, it establishes that federal law is only the supreme law of the land when it is in compliance with the Constitution. So contrary to what Cornell University says, that federal law generally takes precedent over state laws and state constitution, it is specifically takes precedent over state laws and state constitutions only when it's in compliance with the Constitution. So what that means is if the federal government is creating rules, regulations, and laws that are not consistent with the Constitution, then they are not supreme to state laws or state constitutions. And Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist 78 that there are actually no law at all. He says no law contrary to the Constitution can be valid, which means if they're creating rules and regulations and laws that are inconsistent with the Constitution, then they are no law at all. For example, there is absolutely no delegation of authority for an EPA. There is no delegation of authority to the federal government for a Department of Education or a Department of Transportation. There is no delegation to the federal government to have anything to do with our schools. There is no delegation to the federal government to engage in social welfare. And there's no delegation to the federal government to do the FBI or the FDA or the Bureau of Land Management or the Federal Forestry Services. All of these executive agencies in the exercise of their authority are completely unconstitutional, which means, according to Article 6, Section 2, as explained by Alexander Hamilton, they are not the supreme law of the land. They are no law at all. And so what you have now is the federal government, through either law or Supreme Court opinion, expanding their own power simply because they say so. I mean, that's the whole Marbury versus Madison thing, right? The Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiters of the Constitution because they declared it themselves. So the federal government has the power to decide the limits of its own power because it declared it has the power to determine the limits of its own power. That's circular logic. That makes no sense whatsoever. And the biggest culprit, as you said, is this Commerce Clause thing, or the General Welfare Clause. And the interesting thing is that in 1792, James Madison is already standing before the House of Representatives trying to explain to Congress why the General Welfare Clause does not allow them to collect taxes from the people to subsidize private industry. And he warns that if you allow the federal government to expand its power using this General Welfare Clause, that you will create an unlimited federal government. And if I could just quote him for your listeners here real quick, because this is a very, very stunning thing. He says, quote, "For if the clause in question really authorizes Congress to do whatever they think fit, provided it be for the general welfare, of which they are to judge, and money can be applied to it, Congress will then have the power to create and support a judiciary establishment with jurisdiction extending to all cases favorable, in their opinion, to the general welfare, in the same manner as if they have the power to pass laws and apply money, providing in any other way for the general welfare." He says if Congress can employ money indefinitely to the general welfare, and are the sole and supreme judges of the general welfare, they may take care of religion into their own hands. They may appoint teachers in every state, county, and parish and pay them out of their public treasury. They may take into their own hands the education of children, establishing like manner curriculums throughout the Union. They may assume the provisions of the poor. They may undertake the regulation of all roads other than post roads, and in short, Madison says, everything from the highest object of state legislation down to the most minute object of police would be thrown under the power of Congress. For every object I have mentioned would admit the application of money and might be called, if Congress so pleased, provisions for the general welfare. And in 1792, James Madison warned that if we allowed the federal government that kind of latitude, we would transmute ourselves from a constitutional republic to, at best, a limited monarchy with unlimited power.
Well, I think James Madison would be put on a list somewhere today, wouldn't he? With rhetoric like that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the DOD already put them on the list. Remember that training that they gave last year?
Oh, yeah.
The EEOC meeting said that those who believe that our framers had a violent extremist ideology. So anybody who opposes the government, anybody who believes that the Constitution was written to limit the federal government, and that the states carry more power than the federal government, and that the people are the ruler of the government, as all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, you are on a list somewhere if you say anything about that in public. I'm proud to be on the list, by the way. It doesn't bother me.
Now, the proper relation. We know where it stands now. The states are no longer sovereign. Their sovereignty was crushed in the so-called American Civil War. What's the proper relation to the states to the federal government?
Well, the proper relationship from the states to the federal government is just simply this. The states are the creators of the Constitution. We know the states created the Constitution because they're the ones that ratified it. And as the parties to the constitutional contract that created the federal government, we know that the states are the creators of the federal government. The states created the federal government and enumerated its powers. They created a limited and defined federal government, and then they did the most important thing they could have ever done. They reserved all other powers to themselves. James Madison tells us in a document that we refer to as Federalist Papers 45 that the powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Those that remain in the states are numerous and indefinite. He says the powers delegated to the federal government will be exercised principally on external objects, war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. He says every other power, the lives, the liberties, the properties of the people, the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the states will be reserved to the states. And so understanding that the states delegated a portion of their power to the federal government when they created it, what we have to understand by the fact that the 10th Amendment says powers delegated is that definition of that word delegated. The word delegated means a temporary transfer of authority from a higher power to a lower power. The states delegated a portion of their power to the federal government, which means the states, the higher power, temporarily delegated power to the lower power, the federal government. Problem is that we have a federal government now where the creation has become superior to the creator. And I say we have a Frankenstein federal government.
Yeah, it's disordered, it's unnatural, and we're seeing the bitter fruits of that relationship today. Definitely.
Oh, it is absolutely unnatural. It's a violation of natural law. It is a violation of the laws of primacy. It is a violation of the law of history. Every single natural law ever existed is being violated because our federal government exerts the power that it exerts.
It supplants the rule of law with the law of the jungle, who has the most guns, and that's what we're dealing with today. It's just brute force.
Well, but even worse than that, it's the law of man, right? It's just arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever the president says. It's whatever the Supreme Court says. It's whatever the single arbitrary agent operating in the field says. And if you disobey, if you refuse to obey unlawful orders, then the government feels justified to shoot you in the streets these days. It's very scary.
Well, KrisAnne.
But there is hope.
Okay. Yes. Well, yeah, there's always hope because there's always a tomorrow. So until there is.
Well, there is hope. There's lots of hope, right?
Yeah.
Well, the history proves. See, I teach 700 years of history that created our Constitution, and that 700 years is so telling. It tells us that whenever a people stand for liberty, they win, and they win better limited government than we had before. So it's not a matter of if we stand, it's always a matter of when, because human nature only tolerates so much. And the spirit of liberty is in the blood of Americans. I mean, that's how we were birthed. You can't get rid of it. Mm-hmm. And so where other countries will roll over and become, refugees and flee their country, Americans are not going to flee their country. This is not going to happen in America. Americans will get ticked off and they will push back. And so it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And all we're saying is that education teaches us how to do this peacefully. There's a reason we're a constitutional republic and not a kingdom. Because when your government jumps the rails in a kingdom, your only options are chopping off heads. Our framers didn't want that future for their posterity. Mm-hmm. They created a constitutional republic so that we would have peaceful measures to change this. And we do have peaceful measures. We still have peaceful measures. We just need to get people educated. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, and that's why you travel so much and you're so busy.
22, right, because this is important.
Yeah, well, I guess it was. I'll butcher the quote, but I think it's Thomas Jefferson said, "The nature of man is to suffer a long train of usurpation and abuses." But eventually, there's a breaking point. And like you mentioned, it's not violence; it's raising consciousness. And if you raise public consciousness and awareness of these things, it doesn't have to be violent. And if it does, we won't win that battle anyway. So. It's about convincing.
Yeah, eventually, yes, absolutely.
You know,
Right, right.
yeah.
Well, I'm a Christian believer, and I believe that God is the author of liberty, and I believe, as Patrick Henry said on March 23rd of 1775, that that God will send friends to help us in defending our liberty, because it is a just cause. Patrick Henry called it a holy cause, and so I believe that as well. And when we stand for the gifts that God has given us, as all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, then we don't have to stand alone, and that's why we win.
Now, what do you mean? You quote Patrick Henry. Now, he was invited to the Constitutional Convention. He was quoted as saying, "I'm not going. I smell a rat." What do you what do you have to say about that? I always like that quote because
Well, yeah, that's funny. No, Patrick Henry was right in some cases, and Patrick Henry was wrong in some cases.
hmm
But the interesting thing is that we have a constitution built of not one man. We have a constitution built of many people who were all focused on a single issue, the issue of liberty. I mean, Patrick Henry was even involved in the ratification of the Bill of Rights, so
hmm
he was not completely uninvolved in the whole situation.
yeah.
So that's part of the problem. We have people who want to discredit the Constitution by attacking individuals. And the beauty is that there wasn't a single individual that created our Constitution. So you can hate Alexander Hamilton, you can hate Patrick Henry, you can hate John Adams, you can hate George Washington, you can hate any of them. It doesn't matter, because there wasn't a single individual that wrote this Constitution, and they were all focused on liberty. And it was not just simply their invention either. There's absolutely nothing invented in our Constitution, our Declaration of our Bill of Rights. All of it was taken from those 5 liberty charters that we talked about before. So it was
Yeah.
the culmination of time-tested, blood-bought experience. And they gave us a constitutional republic, the best form of government to secure the blessings of liberty. And it was up to us to keep it.
Well, KrisAnne, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I said I'd only have you for about a half hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. Because I'm looking at your website and
Thank
looking at
you.
the large body of work. You're a very busy woman, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
And again, good night.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Certainly welcome, and be safe in your travels. So,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
thank you, and good night.